Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Morning, everyone, both to those that are listening online, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to Nissan Communications for making this program possible. Today's November 8th, Election Day. And yes, we have a few people that are, some of our regulars are not here today. Good citizens are doing poll watching. So Brian and Marty and a few others that are normally here are doing poll watching today. Welcome to everyone who is here in the room. And I think there is significance to the fact that it's Election Day because Torah will tell us while we want to make the right decisions and while we want to vote for the individual who we feel is more in line with our values, I very adamantly believe that we control far, far more with our decisions and our mitzvahs and our actions versus what goes on with our leaders. And if everyone in the world, like I said on the high holidays, would dedicate a percentage of the time that they spent during this election series to working on their own character development, we would have a much, much better world. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to discuss Avraham, Yitzchak, Avraham in particular, and by learning by Avraham and becoming better ourselves, that is ultimately the most effective way to change the world, even more than who our leaders are. They can only do so much. As the Kotzker would often say, that when I was a child, I wanted to change the world. After a while, I saw that wasn't very possible. I figured I'll just change my city. I realized, guess what? Wasn't working. At least I have a family to change. It doesn't work very well either to those that are married in the room. They know that. But he said if I change myself, I can influence my family. I can in turn affect the community, and I can help change the world. That is a very Jewish teaching. So yes, we got to vote. Yes, we got to do our part. But I do adamantly believe that the decisions we make in our life, that we are in the driver's seat, that is even more important. So the Parsha this week, Lech Lecha, third Parsha of the Torah, page 34. We live the entire week with Avraham and Sarah. And in a sense, it's the first happy Parsha because Bereshis, Genesis begins on a good note, but then we have the destruction of the world is going downhill at the end. Noah's a kind of rough week. This week we live with Avraham and Sarah the entire week. They were truly trailblazers. And we discussed this briefly last week. Why did Avraham and Sarah earn the distinction of being the first Jews if there were righteous individuals beforehand? Noach gets great praises in the Torah. He's a tzaddik, he's righteous, he walks with God, and yet he's not seen as the first Jew. Why not?
Because he didn't change anybody's.
So he changed himself but didn't care or didn't have any success, any hatzlacha, any success at changing others. So we say that he was very... So again, this sort of contradicts what I just said a moment ago about, but it doesn't contradict. We have to be the best people we need to be in order that we can affect others. Some of you might recall Hillel, in Ethics of Our Fathers, was famous for saying, if I'm not for myself, who am I? And he continues by saying, if I'm only for myself, what am I? How do you reconcile between those two statements? The first half is saying, if I'm not about myself, then what am I? The second statement is saying, if I'm about myself, what am I? How do you reconcile between the first and second part of Hillel's statement? I know we don't have the text in front of us to analyze it, but I'll say it slowly. If I'm not for myself, who am I? If I'm only for myself, what am I? So what is the difference between the two statements? Any thoughts?
One's self-absorbed and one's...
So am I supposed to be for myself or I'm not supposed to be for myself?
Yeah, well, the two aren't mutually exclusive.
For us, why?
You got to be both. You got to be for yourself and you got to be for everyone else.
Any other thoughts? This is open.
Well, I think you can't care about other people if you don't, like you say, nourish your body, do all of the stuff for yourself. Just
So
like
you-
putting that gas mask over your face.
So you got to take care of yourself, take responsibility for yourself, not rely on other people, be your own person. But why? For the sake of what? To do good in the world. Meaning Noach stopped at just the first part. Pam, is that clear? Did Noach take responsibility for himself? Could Noach say yes to the question? If I'm not for myself, who am I? Could Noach say yes to that? Absolutely. Noach withstood all the peer pressure in the world and truly was a different person than everyone else. He could answer a yes to that statement. The next part is, but why is it so important for me to take care of myself? Why? In order that I can affect the entire world. And on that front, he didn't have as much success, and he wasn't considered the first Jew. But it begins by who? How does it begin? Changing yourself, taking responsibility for yourself. Don't blaming anything on anyone else. We're in the driver's seat in our own lives. So Avraham and Sarah had that balance of being able to do both. They were concerned with themselves, but also with the world at large. So let's dive into a part of the story in this week's Torah portion that we don't discuss as often. The portion begins, Abraham and Sarah are told to leave. Just leave. Leave your home. Leave your birthplace. Leave your father's house. Go to the land that I will show you. God doesn't even identify it by name. He's told to leave. He gets to Israel. There's a famine originally. He has to leave Israel. At the beginning of the Parsha is the travels of Avraham. In the middle of the Parsha, Avraham has, at least his shepherds have a dispute with his nephew's shepherds. And Avraham says, hey, I don't want family fights. I think it would be a good idea for you to move to another town. And that way our disputes won't get, in the way of our relationship. Lot moves to a town called Sodom. Okay. We'll learn about that more next week. But then the Torah tells us a little bit of history that's going on. Text 1a. Text 1a tells us that while all of this was going on, there was this major battle in Mesopotamia between a kingdom of 5 kings on one side and a kingdom of 4 kings on the other side. Let's do text 1b. Judy, start 1b, 35.
And the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar, came forth, and they engaged them in battle in the valley of Siddim.
Okay, so they engaged. These 5 kings fought with these 4 kings in a valley called Siddim. Keep on reading.
With Chedorlaomer.
Okay, you can skip this. Okay, the next paragraph you can skip now.
Now the valley of Siddim was composed of many clay pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell there, and the survivors fled to a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And they took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their food, and they departed. And they took Lot and his possessions, the son of Abram's brother, and they departed, and he was living in Sodom.
Okay, so Lot, who is the nephew of Avram, gets kidnapped. He gets captured in battle. He's a prisoner of war. What Avram hears the news, and what does Avram immediately try to do? Rescue Lot. So this is a fundamental difference already between Avram and Noach. Noach wasn't running out there to rescue anyone. He built himself an ark for his family. According to God's instructions, true. Do we see Avraham being commanded by God to engage in this battle? I actually don't. It's interesting. Well, I thought it's interesting. So Avraham takes far more initiative here, and he then tries to rescue Lot. And in text 36, we have Avraham with just 318 people. having a little ambush, and they're victorious miraculously, and they restore all the possessions, and they rescue Lot. So that's what happens in text 1c. And you can imagine how appreciative Sodom was and all the other kings. And they hold a big party, a festive party. And then we have a very odd text, text 1d. And it's an odd text because we don't know who these people are or what is going on. Text 1d, Pam.
And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest to the Most High God. And he blessed him, and he said, Blessed be Avraham to the Most High God, who possesses heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, who has delivered your adversaries into your hand. And Avraham gave Melchizedek a tithe from all of his property.
Okay. And ever noticed this verse before? Never noticed it. So what do we have? The first reference in the Torah to what?
Tithing.
Tithing. Meiser, tithing, tzedakah, this is something that's discussed far later in the Torah, after the giving of the Ten Commandments. Much later we have the command. And this is one of the few exceptions of a mitzvah that we read about in Genesis, in Bereshis. What are you troubled by, Pam?
No, I mean, it's interesting that Abraham gave
Malki.
Melchizedek a tithe from all of Abraham's property?
Yeah.
But why? I mean, he just rescued this guy, didn't he rescue?
So who is this Melchizedek?
Yeah.
we've never been, it's like, we've never been told who this Melchizedek. He is not one of the kings of the four. He sort of comes to the scene, and he's a mystery. Most of the kings in those days were idolatrous, right? We know Avraham was different than the rest of the world. From these verses, does it sound like Melchizedek is an idolatrous king?
His name was
He was a just king.
Melchizedek means a just king.
But he was the king of Salem.
And that's
King of
Shalem.
Shalem. Okay.
Shalem,
So what do we know about him? His name is Just King. He's the king of a place by the name of Shalem. And who is he a priest to?
the Most High
To God. So this sounds very odd. Who is this Melchizedek? And here's the time that, unless you have the oral tradition, I think you don't have any answers over here. Who is Melchizedek? I thought Avraham was like the only righteous person in those days. So the Midrash tells us something very, very fascinating. Here goes, next text, 2a. Please read for us. Sorry, do you mind reading for us 2a?
I would be delighted. 38.
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek, yes?
Yes.
Melchizedek. The Midrash aggressor states that he was Shem, the son of Noah.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
Wait, isn't that like a zillion generations beforehand?
10 generations, right?
No,
So-
not really.
So one of the things we might not remember is that there's a quick sudden drop in life expectancy at the end of last week's Torah portion.
Yeah.
And it's not gradual. It's not gradual at all. You have these people living 900, 800, 700, all of a sudden the flood happens, and then God says, all right, from now on, people are only going to be living, fine. And we have a few generations, 170, eventually goes down to like 120. So Avraham lives 175. That's how long he lives. Avraham lives 175 years. However, Noach was still from the old generation. Noach lives 600. And Shem also lives a huge. So what many people don't realize is that if you actually look at the chronological order, Avraham's first part of his life is in the same time at the end of Noach's life and Shem's life. And in fact, want to hear something even crazier? Shem lives longer
Then Noah.
than
Than
Avraham.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
This is odd, but we don't know much about Shem. We know that Noah had 3 kids. Shem was seen to be the righteous one, right?
What was the
And
name
what
of the
descended
one
from
that did the
Cham.
story?
So we have Shem, Cham, Cham. So Shem was the righteous one. And Shem was a believer in God, but probably more like the Noah, kind of style. doing his thing. But there is even a oral tradition that when Abraham was young, you may have heard the stories, and he smashed his father's idols and he ran away. And where did he run away to? Uncle Shem, or not Uncle Shem, great-great-great-grandpappy Shem, who was still alive at that time. So Shem is a righteous individual who's still alive, and he's the king of a place called Shalem, which later becomes
Yerushalayim.
Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, is actually two words together, which means Yira Shalem, which means awe and complete awe or complete peace also. Shalem is both peace and full, complete. So Yerushalayim, so here we have it. Yes, questions?
Do we know if Noah was an only child? I mean, did Noah
I don't.
have
It's a good
siblings?
question. I don't know the answer to that. If they were not righteous. We had a few righteous people between Adam and Noah. Chanoch was one. Mishuselach was one.
But we don't know if he was an only child.
I don't know.
So
Probably not. I think it does say he gave birth to sons and daughters. All these individuals, it says he gave. Banim ubanot. Yeah, I don't believe he was an only daughter. I don't believe he was.
Avraham actually met Noah. He was 58. Noah was still alive. According to the Humash, if you look at that.
Oh, so you looked it also. There was.
Yeah,
I think it was 39 years. You saw 58.
58. According to the Humash that we have, like the blue book, like we follow when we're reading the Torah. and so on.
Okay. So that's something we don't think about. So
Like
at
we
least
have a-
this gives us the identity of Malki Tzedek. At least it helps us understand why he gave him tzedakah. I guess there was no formal Kohen in those days, right? But he was a teacher. So he gave him tithing. What this class is going to speak a little bit about is the laws and the tradition of tithing, because this is very interesting. Very interesting that we have a post-Torah, like a law in Torah in Genesis. How many of the 613 mitzvot appear actually in Genesis? You hear my question? How many of the mitzvot in the Torah do we see the matriarchs or the patriarchs observed or instructed in? Any ideas? Any?
Just one,
Which one?
believe in God.
Even that, is there a time where God specifically says believe in God? That's okay. Good. So one is to have children. Having children is right there at the beginning. That is told to Adam. Good. That's number one.
And don't eat from the fruit from the tree of.
Yeah, but that's not a mitzvah for. We don't have that today. That was an instruction. But my question is, which mitzvot that we have today is foreshadowed by either the matriarchs or the patriarchs? So one would be
Be fruitful and multiply.
fruitful and multiply. One would be there's none of that.
No.
Circumcision.
When you come
Circumcision.
Uh-huh.
Avraham at the end of this week's parsha is told about circumcision. The third one would be that Jacob later in his life has this nighttime battle and he gets injured, and the Torah tells us from that moment and on Jews shouldn't eat from that sinew. That's why you can't find kosher filet mignon. We spoke about that last year.
What about keep the Sabbath? When does that come in?
Only post-Torah. All the other mitzvot were told to the Jewish people as a nation when they became a nation after the giving of the Torah. Now, we had an interesting hint last week when Noach's instructed to take animals. He's told,
Oh yeah, for the sacrifice.
we have the sacrifice, but what else is he told? There's kosher, non-kosher animals. Wait a minute, kosher, that's not given till. So this tells us something very fascinating, and this is a famous idea. Text 3. It's an idea a lot of people are puzzled by. Text 3. Please. Sorry, what was your first name again? Miriam. Text 3.
Rob said Abraham observed the entire Torah. That's the first stakes. For Abraham listened to my voice.
So there's a midrash that says that the matriarchs and patriarchs observed the whole Torah. Now you're going to ask a very good question. There wasn't a Torah. So what is the answer to that question? It's an important answer. It is true that the Torah was not formally given. It is true that the Torah was not physically given as a set of laws to the Jewish people. But when was the Torah first thought of?
Before creation.
At creation, or even
Before
before creation? We are told that the Torah was the blueprint from which HaShem made the world. So did the spiritual truths exist? Absolutely. It's God's own wisdom. Now, it wasn't formally given until on the Jewish calendar 2448, but the ideas existed. So therefore, it does make sense to say that righteous individuals, through inspiration, through prophecy, through a connection with God, had a sense of what these truths were. Here's the thing, though. The mitzvah did not exist in their concrete, physical form. That only began when the Torah was given. Every mitzvah has a spiritual part and a physical part. When we say that the matriarchs and the patriarchs observe the mitzvahs, often it may have only been the spiritual part. But that is why you'll see an example of Sarah next week, where she's visited by guests, and it says she's baking these unleavened cakes. And what does the Midrash tell us? She's baking matzah. And you tell me, matzah? The Jews didn't even leave Egypt yet. What? They had an intuition as to the mitzvahs even before it was given. So I think it is, while that is true of the entire Torah, there is something unique about the few times that we're specifically told about it. Having children, circumcision, and the one that many people miss out is the one we just mentioned here, and that is tithing. Tithing.
What about resting on the Sabbath from the end of Genesis 1?
Oh, good. Who mentioned Shabbos? And thank you. I stand corrected. The rabbi stands corrected. God clearly says,
It's the first one.
but is there an instruction there how to us?
It just
We
says
should
God rested.
follow the example God
Okay.
sets for us.
But it is only
Yes.
at the Ten Commandments where we are formally told, Zachor Yom HaShabbat Lekacho, remember the Shabbos day and keep it holy. However, the concept of Shabbos existed absolutely in Genesis. I stand corrected.
Because remember,
Very
God did on
corrected.
the seventh day.
I stand very correctly. Good. And that is also why there are traditions that, even while the Jews were in Egypt, they petitioned the Pharaoh that they shouldn't work on Shabbos, but that's for another discussion. Let us now take a step back, and we're going to do two parts of this class. We just have 20 minutes left. So we have the concept of tithing, and many people see this, and other religions borrowed it from us. It's good to reclaim it. It's actually a Jewish idea. So where in Halachah, where in Jewish law does this come from? How is it different than the more generic mitzvah to give tzedakah in general? What is the difference? There's tzedakah and there's meiser. There's 10%. So let's understand where this tradition, now that we see the first mention of it, first mention is Avraham, but post Matan Torah, post giving of the Torah, what is the laws of tithing? So tithing began as something only for whom in biblical times? Well, but what profession? Farmers. Farmers. If we look in the Torah specifically much later, fast forward to Numbers, text 4a, in those days, who were the teachers of the Jews? It was the Levites. They were the teachers. They did the work in they served in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple. So text 4a, please.
And to the descendants of Levi I have given all tribes of Israel as an inheritance in exchange for their service that they perform, the service of the tent of meeting.
Okay, so in biblical times, tithing was far more specific. It existed and was given to the Levites. The Levites. Who gave it? Text 4b, do that one please as well.
You shall tithe all the seed crop that the field gives forth year by year.
Okay, so what if you were, in those days, I mean, a lot of people were farmers, but not everyone was a farmer. What if you were a blacksmith? What if you were a,
Did you give money instead?
was there a biblical mitzvah of tithing, though? Actually, no. The actual biblical mitzvah was only to the Levites. Interesting. They gave tzedakah. There's another mitzvah in Torah, Judy, to give tzedakah. That we have. But what about the mitzvah of tithing? Specifically, that only was the farmers and to the Levites in biblical times. And it also only existed at a time when the Levites were serving and the temple was in existence, so on and so forth. And that's what text 5 said, that after the temple was destroyed, that no longer existed on a biblical level. It continued a little bit on a rabbinic level. So fast forward, the temple is destroyed. There's no more of this biblical tithing. Immediately the sages came out, and the sages says, this concept of tithing, the spiritual idea of tithing, should transcend what took place, and therefore today it should be a mitzvah done by everyone, not only to the Levites, but it's given to, it could be religious organizations, it could be the poor, it could be what is schools, and it's not only given from crops, it's given from everyone. And when the sages came out and they said that, they actually found they always would go back to the verse and see where in the verse was that alluded to. Where in the verse was it alluded to that there is a form of tithing that goes beyond just crops? Liz, text 6.
You shall tithe, we have learned in Sifri. You shall tithe all the seed crop that the field gives forth year by year. This teaches only that we are obligated to tithe crops. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
How do we know of the obligation to tithe interest, business, and all other types of profit? Instead of stating the seed crop, the verse states all the seed crop. This teaches that interest, business, and all other earnings are included.
Now, it is true that this tradition only began when? After the destruction of the temple. But often when the sages made what's called the takana, when the sages instituted something new in Judaism, they found a biblical allusion to it. So they said, it didn't say give the seed crop, it said all. And the all is an extra word. And whenever there's an extra word, it comes to include a new idea. What is that a new idea? That new idea is all business transactions. But this became many parts of Judaism, of course, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, became instituted by the sages, very much like the prayers we have today. And that becomes part and parcel of Halachah. It becomes part of Jewish law, yeah.
What does that mean, all seed crop? Because shouldn't the farmer be keeping some of that?
No, tithing. It says you should tithe from all. No, tithe from all your seed crop. Meaning it comes to include everything. So text 7 then continues and it explains a little bit what happened. Please read for us.
Thank you, Hal.
Our sages instituted monetary tithing, so the idea of tithing should not be completely forgotten in the diaspora. We find parallels to this idea with the sages instituting decrees so as not to forget the concept of eruvin challah.
I'll give the example of challah. There was a biblical mitzvah that when you baked challah, and challah didn't just mean eggy, it didn't mean what we eat on Shabbos. Challah meant all breads. You had to give a portion to the Kohen. Now, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, technically speaking, biblically speaking, that law did not apply. They said this should not be forgotten amongst the Jewish people. There's a concept here. There's an idea here. The idea is the first is dedicated, so they instituted what we have is the mitzvah of challah today, which is taking that little piece away. So, keep on reading.
In the Parsha of Shema, even after you have been exiled, make yourselves distinctive with my commandments, so that these will not be new to you when you return.
Okay.
It's like a reminder.
Correct,
Oh,
correct.
they knew they were gonna be exiled? They figured it?
Well, at which point did the sages say this? It's interesting. At what point did the sages come make this? Where is it from? I would need to look up. Was that when there was the second temple was standing? Was it not? I don't know. In any event, many, however, of the laws of the rabbinic mitzvah of tithing. So does everyone understand that according to most opinions, the commandment to give 10% is a rabbinic mitzvah? Why is it a rabbinic mitzvah? Because the biblical mitzvah, correct. However, like many aspects of Yiddishkeit in Judaism, it is still part and parcel of the Torah. It was an evolution of Torah that was meant to happen by divine providence at that particular time, and it does not diminish from its importance. On the contrary, as we will explain. So many of the laws, and I want to do this a little bit faster, are learned from here. Just like when it came to the tithing. There was no IRS. There was no IRS in biblical times. It was up to every single person to give the tithing, but there were deadlines. There were deadlines from which a person was supposed to do it. There was every single year that a person was supposed to give their tithing from the crop that year. So similarly, text 8a continues. Please read 8a.
It makes sense that profits are calculated every year from the Rosh Hashanah. If in the past year one had business incurring some profits and some losses, he makes more general calculation and gives 10% of the overall profit.
So technically speaking, it could be done once a year, maybe the same time when you go through your IRS, you see what you paid them, and you see how much tzedakah you gave. However, as you see in text 9, it is praiseworthy to go extra and to be stringent and to give tzedakah from each profit. And I know individuals who have what's called a tzedakah bank account. And what they have is, as soon as they get a paycheck, they immediately transfer it into another account. And they say, this is tzedakah money, which I will distribute when I get the opportunity. Because in their mind, from the beginning, this money is HaShem's. This money is tzedakah's.
It's not, I'm sorry, but this is Meiser, not Tzedakah.
Meiser. Meiser means tithing.
Yes.
Correct.
That what you're talking about is Meiser. Tzedakah is different. It's above and beyond the Meiser.
So tzedakah is, so let's differentiate between the two. Tzedakah means when there is a need that comes up, you give. When you look at the Torah, it discusses if a poor person is there, if there's a cause, you should not close your hand, you should not close your arm, you should be open-hearted, and you should give. So tzedakah is a mitzvah that happens when an opportunity arises. You give, okay? And you can give tzedakah here, tzedakah there. Meiser is being proactive and taking from your income this amount, but Pam, that tzedakah can be taken from the meiser which you distributed. Yes. Look at text. Look. There goes text 8b. 8b. Here goes. This is going to be in the text itself.
8b?
Yes, please. Hal.
Only actual profit is counted. Any business expenses such as travel and dining expenses should be subtracted from the total. Only the remainder is considered.
People are laughing here because it sounds like tax season. However, I wanted to let you know there are holy individuals, men and women, who take these halachas, these laws, very seriously. There are an entire books written called The Laws of Tithing. And I get questions sometimes as a rabbi, is this meiser deductible? You get, is this, no, I'm serious. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. Is this expense something? Or a better question is can this be considered tithing? So I'll get a question from someone, I'm going to a fancy dinner of my synagogue, okay? And it's $200 a plate, but I'm having a good meal. So is that considered from my meiser or is it not? I get questions like that often. Someone will say, so the typical answer given is it can all be minus what you would normally eat for supper that night because you've saved yourself. Now, you may not have otherwise had this steak dinner, so you don't have to, but minus what you normally would have eaten that night because you did save yourself that. Okay. Or I'll get a question.
Charities word it that way. Charities word it that way.
Correct. On tax receipts, sometimes you'll do that as well. I get questions about tuition to a Jewish school. Can that be? I get questions about buying a lulav and etrog for Sukkot. I get questions all the time on this, and it's beautiful to see people who take it very seriously.
What about tuition?
You know what? Because at 12:30 we can do other questions. I want to finish it. So who is reading? Yes.
Personal expenses, however, may not be deducted. Therefore, if one made 1,000 gold coins in a year, he gives 100 or 200 in charity. Even if he spent more than 1,000 gold coins on his personal he must nevertheless give 10% of his profits. However, charity expenses such as providing food and funds for the poor, feeding the children of Torah scholars, or hosting a poor guest for the Sabbath meal or any other meal, as is the Jewish way, such funds may be deducted from the Meiser calculation.
Meiser, yeah, Meiser. Meiser in Hebrew means 10. So Pam, tzedakah is part of Meiser. Here, okay. So this is a beautiful Jewish tradition, and in a sense, it's been. You hear about it more from other faiths today, but it's good to know this was our concept. This was our idea, and here is where we have another beautiful idea, and that's text 10a. In Hebrew, the word for giving 10 is aser. Aser means give 10% or give 10, give a tenth. When the Torah says you should give 10%, it says aser to aser. It says the word twice. Now, if you look in any translation, how will it translate it as? You should surely give. It's Hebrew grammar. When it repeats a word twice, it's for emphasis. You should surely give. But the oral tradition says, no. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than that. Obviously, the aser is one thing, and the next word can be read differently. The word in Hebrew for wealthy is ashir. So the oral tradition says as follows, text N, 10a.
Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of the verse?
Aser to aser.
You shall tithe, using a double term. Tithe.
Aser with a sin.
So that you will prosper.
To asher with the letter shin, which means in Hebrew to become wealthy. So he says, the oral tradition says that tzedakah is a vessel for Hashem's blessing. That when we give tzedakah, we believe that rather than this taking away from what we have, this will add to what we have. And friends, this is emunah, this is faith. Faith in the synagogue is one thing. Faith in God in an abstract form is something else. Faith with tzedakah, that's faith in practice. And that's hard. It's hard for everyone. And this teaching from Rabbi Yochanan is not just from the oral tradition, but in a sense, there's a verse in the Tanach itself. There's verse in scriptures itself that says the same idea. It's a famous verse from Malachi. Please read for us.
Bring the whole of the tithes into the treasury, so that there may be nourishment in my house, and test me now therewith, says the Lord of hosts, to see if I will not open for you the sluices of heaven, and pour down for you blessings, until there be no room to suffice.
Where's that from? Tanach itself, scriptures itself says that. The one mitzvah that we are allowed to test God is tzedakah. To test God means, Hashem, I'm giving tzedakah here. This is going beyond what I normally do. Help me out over here. I'm looking for brachas in my own life. I expect brachas in my own life. There's a story told in the Talmud, actually in one of the commentators of the Talmud, about a wealthy individual who passed away. His son inherited the field, and his father was very, very generous with tithing. Son, not so much. And very quickly, the business sort of didn't go so well. And he went up to one of the leaders at that time and says, what am I doing wrong? And he says, you want to know what it was? He says, your father gave 10%, God gave the other 90%. You're now left with just your 10%. That was the story. The rebbe, there's some questions. Let me see if there's some questions from the online community. No. I read a letter someone had written to Lubavitcher Rebbe about a particular difficult time they were going through financially. And I should give a disclaimer before I tell this story. If you look in the laws of Halachah, it says that if by giving 10%, you yourself will have to be dependent upon others, then you should not do it. You should get back on your own two feet. You still need to give tzedakah. You still need to give tzedakah, which means charity here, charity there, when a need comes, but you shouldn't give the 10% if that will require you to be dependent on others. In any event, that's the halacha. But I know of a story, I know who it happened to. Someone was going through a hard time, and they asked the Rebbe if they should temporarily suspend. I know who it was, Rabbi Grossman was his name. his Meiser. And the Rebbe lived with such an incredible faith. He goes, at a time like this, you need to be doing everything you can to get more of Hashem's brachas. To stop giving Meiser at a time like this? In the Rebbe's mind, it was so clear. This idea that we read about in Malachi was so clear. There's a story now that this text brings from one of the talks of the Rebbe. And this talk happened, we have a year here, I believe it was in the 1950s. And because of time, I'll just paraphrase it. But many of the gatherings, the Farbrengens, the gatherings when people would come together, the Rebbe sometimes would make an appeal. People would give in envelopes. And the Rebbe writes, you can follow a little bit in the English, I generally don't voice my opinion about how much each person gives. Whatever you give is beautiful, and whether I'm satisfied or not, I keep that to myself, the Rebbe says. However, the Rebbe says, in this endeavor, they were building up a city in Israel. There's a village in Israel by the name of Kfar Chabad, and they were building, settling the land of Israel. It was a Chabad community. This was very, very dear to the Rebbe. There was also a time Kfar Chabad had a horrible terrorist attack, and right afterwards, there needed to be more encouragement to the people living there to continue. And the Rebbe says, I feel in this situation, if someone's given a little less, I might give you a gentle reminder. Look at the talk. And then I will overcome my shyness and tell them about the importance of this project. I'm certain that Hashem will keep his word. If one feels that he can do more than he can afford, the purpose is in order that he can be told fourfold. I wish I was a Rebbe, and I could, not I wish I was a Rebbe, but I wish I could give a promise like this. There was someone at that Farbrengen who lived in New Haven. He dealt with shmatas. You know, many Jews in those days dealt with shmatas. His name was, and his name was, wasn't a rabbi. His name was David Deitch. Oh, you know the story?
No, it's written.
Oh, the story is there. And after that, this David Deitch was very, very comfortable. By no means a philanthropist. He was very generous, but he wasn't like a tycoon. But, successful and very, very generous. And he writes $3,000 towards this project, which for him was a lot. Not only that, in the 1950s, $3,000 says 25 today. For him, this was a huge amount of money. And the Rebbe then turns to him and says, David, 10 times that amount. It's almost, if he said twice that amount, he would be like, where am I going to get this from? 10 times was beyond, but only a Rebbe can do that. And the Rebbe knows his customers. And you can imagine when he drove home to New Haven that day, what he was thinking. And the story continues that he says, I have to get a loan. He had no way of getting that money. Imagine taking out a loan to give tzedakah. I say this story because that level of faith is tremendous. I wish I would be able, I'll say this very humbly and I wish I would be able to withstand this level of a nisai in this test. I've never had the Rebbe tell me that, but even if it happened, it wouldn't be so easy. And he sees a banker that he knew about, and he asks for this $30,000 loan, and he puts a lot of stuff on the line for it. And he returns to the Rebbe with a $30,000 check, and it's an incredible thing. And a few days later, he gets a phone call from a guy who dealt with vinyl stuff, and there was a fire in the factory. And I guess the guy had insurance money, but he had to liquidate all this slightly diminished vinyl, and he buys a good truckload, and immediately he sells it at full price, and he makes a good amount of money. Then he calls the guy back. Do you have more? He has a whole factory. He buys out that guy, and from that, he became incredibly, incredibly wealthy. And stories like this help us in our faith, I believe. But we should recognize that this truly is a Jewish concept. And again, the idea is the recognition. I remember, was it 4 years ago in the campaign where there was this line, you didn't build that? And it was a big deal in the campaign 4 years ago, where you didn't do it yourself. It was everyone who did the infrastructure and built the roads and built the tunnels. And that was the whole question. I built it or you built it. And of course, the Jewish perspective is going to be HaShem, God builds it. And the way it's nice to say that idea and to say the words, but the way we truly show that we believe that idea is when we give tzedakah generously, and specifically as we learn in this parsha, learning from Avraham, Meiser, tithing. We'll hold it over there for today. Any questions from the online community?
Nope, nothing here.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. We will be back here next week, and a special thanks to Nissan Communication for making this program available. Have a wonderful week.
You're tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health Then with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.